The static hiss of the satellite phone was the loneliest sound in the world, but it was my only link home. I was halfway through my deployment, calling from a dust-caked outpost thousands of miles from everything I knew. All I wanted was to catch my sister before her wedding week kicked into high gear, just to wish her well and hear a familiar voice. I was expecting her cheerful greeting, but the voice that answered was low and cold. It was my father, Mark, a man who saw family loyalty not as an emotion, but as an item on a balance sheet. And I knew in an instant that I was in the red. "I was hoping to speak to Ashley," I said, my own voice sounding small against the hum of the bass. He ignored that completely. "We received your final answer about the reenlistment bonus," he stated, each word a chip of ice. $15,000 would have secured the upgraded venue she wanted. "It would have shown you care." I tried to explain again that the money was the start of a life for me. A down payment on a small house maybe, security. He just scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound that traveled across the globe to gut me. "Your future is with this family, Alex. Your security is helping us." I could feel the conversation circling a drain, the same one it always did. My accomplishments were only valuable if they could be liquidated for my sister's comfort. My service was just a paycheck they felt entitled to. He let the silence hang for a moment, heavy and suffocating, before delivering the final sentence. "You put the Navy before your own blood. You're a traitor to this family," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "You are not welcome at the wedding. You're not welcome here, period." Then, the click. The line went dead. The call ended, and in the silence of that overseas base, 10,000 miles from home, I felt the full weight of it. This wasn't a fight about money. It was the final invoice for a lifetime of being their family ATM, and my account was officially closed. That word, traitor, echoed in the deafening silence after the call. It wasn't just an insult, it was a diagnosis. It was the name they had given to the problem I had become, the problem of no longer being useful to them in the way they demanded. And at the center of their demands, as always, was my sister, Ashley, the bride-to-be. Ashley was the family's charismatic son, a radiant princess around whom we were all expected to gratefully orbit. She possessed a kind of effortless charm that made people want to give her the world. A talent my parents were more than happy to indulge, no matter the cost to anyone else. Her happiness was the family's primary project, and my role was simply to help fund it. I remember her 18th birthday with a clarity that still stings. My parents had been complaining for months about how tight money was, how the mortgage was a killer, how they were barely scraping by. It was the same story I'd heard my whole life, usually whenever I needed something. Yet, on the morning of her birthday, parked in the driveway was a brand new cherry-red convertible, adorned with a ridiculously oversized white bow. My father stood there, beaming with a pride I'd never seen directed at me, while he popped a bottle of champagne, real champagne, not the cheap stuff. The unspoken cost of that car hung in the air, a silent testament to where the family's priorities truly lay. As Ashley squealed with delight, I felt that old familiar ledger opening up in my mind. That single car cost more than the computer I'd been told we couldn't afford for my schoolwork, forcing me to use the library's ancient desktops. It was worth more than the combined cost of the band camp I wanted to go to, and the coding classes I'd begged to take. All those times I was told maybe next year or we just can't swing it, Alex, they were all lies. The money was always there, it just wasn't for me. I was the line item that could be cut, the expense that could be deferred indefinitely, because I was the responsible one. My own 18th birthday, just a year earlier, was a masterclass in that very principle. I didn't ask for a car, I asked for a little help with a down payment on a used truck so I could reliably get to my after-school job. My father put his hand on my shoulder, his expression one of paternal wisdom. "You're so much more mature than your sister, Alex," he'd said. "You can save up for it yourself. It'll build character." It was a compliment wrapped around a rejection, a tactic they had perfected over the years. So, I did. I worked double shifts for over a year, saving every dollar I could, and eventually bought a 15-year-old pickup truck with more rust than paint. I was proud of it, but it was a pride tinged with the bitter knowledge that my character was just a convenient excuse for their neglect. The architect of this delicate, damaging balance was my mother, Linda, the family's designated peacemaker whose only strategy for maintaining peace was to give my father and sister exactly what they wanted. She saw my independence not as a strength to be celebrated, but as a resource to be exploited. Whenever I achieved something on my own, it became proof that I didn't need their help, freeing up more resources for Ashley. "Oh, Alex can handle it, he's fine," she'd say, brushing off any potential guilt. Her love was a passive, gentle thing that did more damage than my father's overt dismissiveness, because it was her job to smooth over the inequities and call it fairness. Their entire family philosophy was built on a single fraudulent phrase: family helps family. It was the banner they flew to justify every demand, every sacrifice they asked of me. But it was a one-way street, a pipeline of resources that flowed from me to them, and specifically to Ashley. My part-time job in high school wasn't for my own savings, it was to cover my own expenses so they could afford Ashley's ballet lessons. When I got my first real job after graduation, the expectation was that I would contribute a significant portion to the household, not as rent, but as a family contribution that somehow always coincided with Ashley needing a new wardrobe or a weekend trip with her friends. So when I walked into the recruiter's office and decided to enlist in the Navy, I knew what their reaction would be. They didn't see a young man seeking purpose or honor or a way to serve his country. They saw their most reliable asset walking out the door. They saw their emergency fund, their supplemental income for Ashley's lifestyle, suddenly developing a mind of its own. My father was furious, not because he would miss me, but because he was losing control of a resource. My mother cried, not out of fear for my safety, but because my departure upset the fragile peace she had so carefully curated. A peace built entirely on my silent compliance. The traitor label my father hurled at me over the phone. It wasn't new. It was just the first time he'd been desperate enough to say it out loud. For years, any act of self-preservation on my part was framed as a betrayal. Choosing to save for my own future instead of funding my sister's extravagant wedding wasn't just a disagreement, it was treason. I was deserting my post, abandoning my one true purpose in their eyes, to be the silent, responsible support column for the glittering monument that was my sister. Lying in my bunk that night, I finally understood. They didn't see a son or a brother. They saw a resource they could no longer control. They called me a traitor for leaving. I decided I would show them what true honor looked like. The pain from my father's words didn't just fade. It crystallized. Over the next few days, something inside me shifted. The deep, aching need for their approval, a hunger that had gnawed at me my entire life, finally died. It left behind a void, and into that void rushed a cold, quiet calm. I was done seeking their love. I was done trying to make them see me. My new mission was simpler and much more achievable. I would force them to see the truth of what they were, using a currency they could never understand: honor. They had built their entire world on a narrative of lies, and I decided it was time to make a public correction. The catalyst arrived about 2 weeks later, in the most unexpected way. I was summoned to my commanding officer's office, a place you never want to be called to without knowing why. I stood at attention, my mind racing through every possible infraction, but his face was unreadable. He asked me to sit, then slid an official-looking document across his desk. He explained that my actions during a hostile engagement weeks earlier, the one I never spoke about, the one that still played out in my quiet moments, had been reviewed. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action, he told me, I was being awarded the Silver Star. I stared at the paperwork, the words blurring together. The Silver Star. It was one of the highest military decorations for valor. It felt unreal, like it was happening to someone else. Then, as my CO explained the ceremony details, a new feeling cut through the shock. It was the sharp, clean feeling of an opportunity falling perfectly into place. I asked for the date of the ceremony. It was the 14th of the month. My sister's wedding was on the 16th. In that moment, the entire plan unfolded in my head, a beautiful, precise, and inescapable piece of emotional architecture. This award wasn't just a medal. It was a key. I made only one phone call. I dialed my uncle, David, my dad's brother, and a retired Marine colonel who had a built-in detector for my father's brand of nonsense. He'd always treated me with a respect I never got from my own parents. I kept my voice steady and professional. I didn't complain or vent. I simply stated the facts. Uncle Dave, I said, I've been awarded the Silver Star. The ceremony is on the 14th, and I was hoping you'd be my guest. He was quiet for a moment, then congratulated me with genuine pride. I let the silence sit before adding the final piece. I'm on emergency leave for it, which means I'll be stateside for Ashley's wedding, the one I'm banned from attending. I didn't have to say anything else. He understood everything. I'll be there, Alex, he said, his voice firm. For the ceremony. And I'll see you on the 16th, too. I had the truth, forged in fire and recognized by my country. I had the uniform. All that was left was to walk into their perfectly manicured world and let the light burn it all down. We stood outside the grand ballroom doors, the polished wood muffling the sounds of celebration within. I could hear the faint murmur of 100 conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the manufactured joy of an event designed to impress. My Uncle David stood beside me, a solid presence in his Marine Corps dress blues. I smoothed the front of my own navy dress whites, the fabric crisp and immaculate. Every crease was perfect. Every ribbon was aligned. Every polished surface gleamed. This uniform wasn't a costume. It was armor forged from discipline and sacrifice. Inside that ballroom was the family that had cast me out. In my hand, I held the truth. Through the crack in the door, I could hear my father's voice, amplified by a microphone. He was in the middle of his big toast, the moment he'd been rehearsing for months. His voice was thick with false sentimentality as he spoke about the importance of family, of loyalty, of supporting one another through thick and thin. I listened to him praise my sister Ashley, calling her his perfect, loyal daughter, the one who always understood that family comes first. Each word was a masterpiece of hypocrisy, a carefully painted lie for public consumption. And as the crowd murmured in sycophantic agreement, my uncle caught my eye and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. We pushed the doors open and walked in. We didn't storm in, we didn't rush. We simply entered, our steps falling in a steady, measured cadence that felt more powerful than any shout. The effect was instantaneous. The conversations sputtered and died, one by one, like lights going out down a street. A wave of silence radiated from the doorway, washing over the entire room. Hundreds of faces turned towards us, their expressions shifting from curiosity to confusion to outright shock. They saw two men in immaculate dress uniforms, standing tall and solemn. And on my chest, they saw the stark silver gleam of the medal I had earned. My father froze mid-sentence, the microphone clutched in his hand. His face was a slow-motion car crash of emotions. The jovial, proud host dissolved into a confused man, which then curdled into pure, unadulterated fury. His eyes locked on me, ignoring my uncle completely. "What are you doing here?" He spat into the mic, his voice a venomous whisper that carried to every corner of the silent room. "I told you, you are not welcome. Security, get him out of here." A few nervous security guards started to move from the edges of the room, looking uncertain. They saw a decorated naval officer, not a wedding crasher. Before they could take a single step, my uncle moved. With the calm authority of a man who had commanded others his entire life, he walked to my father and gently took the microphone from his stunned grasp. He held up a hand to the approaching security, a simple gesture that stopped them in their tracks. "Stand down," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. Then he turned to the bewildered guests. "I apologize for the interruption," he began, his voice now booming with a respectful power. "Most of you know me. For those who don't, I'm Colonel David Miller. And this," he said, turning and placing a hand on my shoulder, "is my nephew, Petty Officer Alex Miller." He paused, letting the silence stretch. His father just called him unwelcome. A few weeks ago, he called him a traitor for choosing to serve his country over funding a party. A gasp went through the crowd. "I think it's important you all know what this traitor was doing while we were all safe at home." He looked directly at my father. "Do you even know what that is he's wearing on his chest, Mark?" My father just stared, his face pale and slack-jawed. My uncle didn't wait for an answer. "That is the Silver Star. He earned it for pulling 3 of his men out of a burning vehicle under enemy fire. He ran into the flames that everyone else was running from. He is not a traitor. He was a hero." The word hung in the air, unspoken but understood by every single person in that room. The narrative my father had so carefully constructed, the story of the ungrateful, disloyal son, had just been utterly and completely demolished by a truth so powerful it felt like a physical force. I saw my sister Ashley's face, a mask of pure horror as her perfect day dissolved into a stage for her family's public shaming. I saw my mother weeping silently at her table. I saw the guests looking from me to my sputtering father and back again, their faces a mixture of awe for me and contempt for him. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. My presence was my statement. My uniform was my evidence. I simply held my father's gaze for one long, final moment, and I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a truce. It was a dismissal, and in the ringing silence of that shattered reception, I turned around and walked out. I didn't need to burn any bridges. The truth had just vaporized them. My uncle and I didn't say a word as we left the reception hall. We just walked out into the cool night air and got into his car. He drove us to a quiet, dimly lit bar on the other side of town, the kind of place with old wood and low music, where conversations were meant to be private. As soon as I sat down in a worn leather booth, my phone, which had been silent on the drive over, began to buzz incessantly on the table. A blocked number, then another, and another. Each buzz was a ghost from a life I had just walked away from, a desperate, belated attempt to pull me back into the chaos. I looked at the vibrating screen and felt nothing. I simply reached over and switched it to silent, the gesture feeling more final than anything I had ever done. My Uncle David ordered us a pair of drinks, and for a long while, we just sat in a comfortable silence. He had seen it all, and he knew I didn't need platitudes. Finally, he leaned forward, his expression not triumphant, but somber. He told me what happened after we left. The implosion was immediate and total. The stunned silence had given way to a wildfire of whispers. Guests weren't consoling my parents, they were questioning them, their faces a mixture of pity and contempt. My father, stripped of his righteous anger, had apparently just crumbled, unable to answer anyone. Ashley had fled the room in tears, her perfect day ruined not by a malicious act, but by an unavoidable truth. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect family had been shattered in front of the very audience it was meant to impress. A few days later, after I had returned to my base, a single email slipped past the blocks I had set up. It was from my mother. It was a long, rambling wall of text, a masterpiece of manipulative sorrow and blame-shifting. It started with, "I don't know why you felt the need to embarrass your sister on what should have been the happiest day of her life," and it went downhill from there. She wrote about how I had torn the family apart, how my father was a broken man, how I had been selfish. The apology, when it finally came, was the hollowest thing I had ever read. "I'm sorry you felt that we left you with no other choice." I read it twice, not with anger, but with a strange sense of detachment, like a scientist examining a specimen. Every word was designed to make me feel guilty, to make me responsible for her pain, for their shattered reputation. It was the same old script, the one where my feelings were an inconvenience and their desires were paramount. For a moment, the old Alex, the boy who just wanted his mom to see him, wanted to write back, to explain, to defend himself. But he was gone. I simply moved my cursor over the email, took a deep breath, and clicked delete. I had chosen my family, and it wasn't them. That single click was my true declaration of independence. 1 year later, the life I was living felt like it belonged to someone else, someone freer and lighter than I had ever been. I had used my reenlistment bonus, the very money that had started the war, as a down payment on a small, modest house just a few miles from my new base. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every nail I hammered into the wall to hang a picture, every patch of grass I mowed in the backyard, it was all mine, earned and owned. At work, I found a new purpose in mentoring the younger sailors, the ones fresh out of boot camp with that familiar mix of fear and bravado in their eyes. I saw myself in them, and I made it my mission to be the leader for them that I had never had. I remember one warm Saturday afternoon, standing in my backyard with the smell of grilling burgers in the air. A half-dozen of my friends from the unit were there, laughing and trading stories. These were the men and women who had my back, no questions asked. We were a family forged not by blood, but by shared trust and mutual respect. My friend, a fellow petty officer named Mike, handed me a cold drink and clapped me on the shoulder. "You look happy, man," he said. And I realized with a sudden profound clarity that I was. There were no transactions here, no hidden ledgers, no constant pressure to perform or provide. It was just peace. A quiet, steady sense of belonging that I had spent my entire life searching for. That Christmas, a card arrived from my Uncle David. Tucked inside his usual warm holiday wishes was a short clipped update on the family I'd left behind. It wasn't written with malice, just as a statement of fact. My parents had become reclusive, rarely attending extended family gatherings anymore, unable to face the quiet judgment in the eyes of their relatives. Ashley's fairy tale marriage had lasted less than a year. Apparently, her husband's family hadn't appreciated the scandal, and her own brand of entitled charm wasn't enough to hold things together when the money and status were tarnished. They were no longer titans whose moods dictated my happiness. They were just distant, sad people, living in the ruins of a kingdom they had built on lies. Their power over me was gone. They banished me for choosing a life of honor over a life of obligation, but in the end, the family I chose gave me a home, and the truth I chose gave me my freedom. If you've ever had to find your own honor when the world told you you had none, share your story in the comments. I see you, and I salute you.